A student from an American university was found dead in her home. As soon as the police started their investigation, they uncovered several disturbing facts. They were faced with 3 possible scenarios, and each one was more terrifying than the last. It took 2 years for them to finally learn the truth, but it came at a high cost. Brooke Baker was born in 1981 in a small American town in Indiana. Even in high school, she became interested in journalism, worked for a local newspaper, and planned to build her future career in the profession. She had every chance of succeeding. The girl was very outgoing, had many friends, and showed a keen interest in any topic that came her way. After high school, Brooke moved to the town of Vincennes, where she enrolled in the local university's journalism program. She immediately got a job at the student newspaper and made many new friends. Unfortunately, she soon also made enemies. Upon joining the newspaper, Brooke wanted to write a major story about a high-profile topic related to the university. In the fall of 1997, when she was 19, she finally uncovered a very disturbing fact. Rumors were circulating on campus that several female students had been assaulted by members of a male fraternity. Brooke began to delve into the topic, talking to victims and gathering material for an investigation. When members of the fraternity found out about it, the girl started receiving threats. Sometimes they threatened her openly. Later, they began sending letters, but none of this scared Brooke. She wanted her investigation to help other female students avoid becoming victims of such crimes. One day, while Brooke was at a friend's house off campus, members of the fraternity arrived and started threatening her again. They told her that if she didn't stop digging into the topic, she would face serious consequences. Fortunately for her, the incident didn't escalate beyond aggressive shouting and insults. But Brooke decided to protect herself from potential attacks by fraternity members. She moved out of the dorm and into a rented house near the university that belonged to a campus police officer. In part, she did it because of her parents' constant worry. They were aware of the topic Brooke was working on and also knew about the threats against her. 2 weeks passed since then. She continued to work on her investigation and, at least at home, felt safe. On the morning of Sunday, September 7th, her younger brother came to visit Brooke. No one answered the door, so her brother turned the doorknob and found that it was unlocked. At the time, he thought his sister was still asleep, but the truth was far more terrifying. Entering her bedroom, her brother saw Brooke lying in a pool of blood with no signs of life. He immediately called the police and an ambulance, but the girl was already dead. From the very first moments, it was clear to investigators that they were dealing with a murder. The amount of blood throughout the house and the numerous signs of a struggle confirmed it. The police also noticed something strange. The bathtub was filled to the brim, the faucet was running, and several towels and a number of other items were in a pile. The perpetrator had evidently tried to wash off everything he had touched. In the kitchen sink, they found a knife that had been thoroughly cleaned with detergent. Because of this, the police were unable to find any fingerprints or DNA evidence from the killer in the house. Furthermore, there were no signs of a forced entry. This meant the girl had either let the perpetrator in herself or had left the door unlocked. After examining Brooke's body, medical experts confirmed that she had died as a result of an attack. The unknown perpetrator had stabbed her 11 times and also sexually assaulted her. The experts were able to extract a DNA sample of an unknown male from her body, which was immediately checked against all available databases. Unfortunately, there were no matches. This meant that before Brooke's murder, he had never been in police custody for any crime. The police began searching for witnesses who might have seen who had come to Brooke's house on the day of the murder. They also had no luck here. Neighbors hadn't seen any suspicious people, cars, or anything else. As a result, with a complete lack of clues, detectives had to work almost blindly. After talking to the victim's friends and family, they learned about the threats against her from members of the university fraternity. Given that Brooke wanted to publicize potential cases of violence against girls, the police immediately began to consider these students as suspects. They were questioned and had their DNA samples taken, but none of them showed a match. In the end, the person who attacked Brooke that evening was definitely not a member of the fraternity. However, the police didn't rule out that the fraternity members could have hired someone else for this horrific act. But the fraternity involvement theory didn't quite hold up in one respect. The killer had entered the house through an unlocked door. as there were no signs of a break-in. Brooke's acquaintances said she never left her door unlocked, especially with the threats against her. This meant she either knew her killer and let him in, or he somehow convinced the girl to let him inside. When Brooke's friends and family learned that the police considered the fraternity's involvement unlikely, they shared another alarming fact. After moving into the rented house, the girl had repeatedly complained about the landlord, who was behaving very strangely. He often came to her house without warning or permission, opening the door with his own keys. Several of these incidents made Brooke seriously consider her own safety. The landlord came to her house one night while she was sleeping, entered her room, and turned on the light. Another time, he came into the house when she was in the shower. Each time, he explained that he urgently needed to pick up some items from the house. Of course, Brooke didn't believe him and started to fear the man. The law strictly prohibits a landlord from entering a tenant's residence without their permission, and the consequences can be very serious. It seemed a campus police officer should know this perfectly well, but he continued to come to the house under various pretexts. Since he had a personal set of keys, he could open the door at any time without any signs of a break-in. Learning about this, the city police paid him a visit with questions. The man stated he was not involved and provided a DNA sample, which also did not match the one found on the girl's body. No other evidence of his involvement could be found, and the detectives were once again left empty-handed. They soon found out that a few days before the murder, Brooke had placed an ad in the newspaper looking for a roommate. She was afraid to live there alone because of the landlord's constant visits, and hoped that if someone else lived in the house, he would finally stop coming over. She also hoped to share the rent with someone to save a significant amount of money. The detectives became interested in this ad and developed a new theory. The killer could have responded to it and come to Brooke's house to see the place. Once alone with the victim, he could have attacked her. This would explain the lack of signs of forced entry, but it also made finding the culprit more difficult. Since none of the neighbors had seen any strangers near the house, it was simply impossible to track down the mysterious visitor. The only thing left for the police to do was to look for new leads. The case dragged on for months, and detectives continued to search for the perpetrator, considering every possible scenario. In total, 400 people were questioned, and DNA samples were taken from 50 of them. All of them failed to match the sample found on Brooke's body. Investigators even traveled to neighboring states to check on several suspects for their potential involvement in the murder. But all of this brought no results. Almost 2 years passed before a breakthrough in the case occurred. On July 5, 1999, the police received a report about the disappearance of another student from the same university, named Erica Norman. The police arrived at her house, where a horrific scene awaited them. There were bloodstains on the floor and walls, but then they noticed something truly unsettling. The bathtub was filled to the brim, the faucet was running, and a sofa cushion was floating in the water. The girl herself was nowhere to be found. Detectives quickly realized that this crime was, with a high degree of probability, committed by the same person who had killed Brooke 2 years earlier. And now, they had a new chance to catch this serial killer red-handed. And here, they finally got lucky. Thanks to a large-scale witness interview, the police learned that Erica was last seen leaving a restaurant on the day of her disappearance with another student, 22-year-old Brian Jones. The young man agreed to provide a DNA sample and even allowed the police to search his house and car without a warrant. He also gave the police the clothes he was wearing on the day of Erica's disappearance. Detectives looked into his background and found that he had never been arrested for any offenses. Such willing cooperation led them to believe he was unlikely to be involved in the murder. Unfortunately, experts were unable to find any DNA or fingerprints at the scene of Erica's murder, but the DNA sample from Brooke's body was still in the lab. When they compared it to Brian's sample, the specialists found a 100% match. Immediately after this, Brian was arrested and questioned, but he denied his guilt. Digging a little deeper, detectives found that the young man was personally acquainted with Brooke. He lived in the same room with her boyfriend. While Brian was in custody, the police tried to solve the main mystery. Where was Erica Norman? Judging by the amount of blood in the house, detectives didn't expect to find her alive. However, they still organized a large-scale search and 2 weeks later announced the discovery of her body. A farmer from the neighboring state of Illinois found the girl in a cornfield. After getting a sample of her DNA, experts quickly established Brian's involvement. The reason was that during the search of his car, bloodstains were found on the steering wheel and door handles. They were also found in his house on the shower stall frame. All of these samples matched Erica's. Given this evidence, Brian would likely have been found guilty and could have received the death penalty. Apparently, this prospect frightened him, and he decided to confess to Erica Norman's murder in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. The trial went fairly quickly, and the judge sentenced Brian to 60 years in prison for Erica's murder. The trial for Brooke Baker's case began next. The gist of Brian's plea bargain was that the court would waive the death penalty and he would only confess to one murder. Accordingly, the killer pleaded not guilty to the second murder. At first glance, such a deal may seem strange, but it's actually logical. If a criminal refuses to admit guilt and the evidence is limited, there's always a chance that the lawyers will get him off the hook. Even if that doesn't happen, they can drag the trial on for years. A confession, however, eliminates both of these scenarios, and even for one murder, the guilty party will receive a long enough sentence to spend the rest of their life in prison. This way, a dangerous killer is guaranteed to be isolated from society. However, Brian's lawyers failed to work a miracle, and in December 2000, the court found him guilty of Brooke Baker's murder. For this, he received a life sentence plus 20 years for violent acts. Despite all this, he retained the right to apply for early release in 2030 after 30 years of imprisonment. Given that Brian was only 24 years old at the time of the sentencing, he has hope of being released at age 54. However, the chances are slim. Such monsters usually have all their petitions for release rejected. Let's hope he is kept behind bars until he is an old man. After Brian went to prison, the police still wondered if he had other victims. It was obvious that his crimes were serial in nature. The detectives were 100% sure of one thing. If Brian had managed to escape punishment, he would have killed again, sooner or later. Take care, and thank you for watching.